The last beam of sunset spread across the Neo Memoria skyline, casting long shadows through Dr. Kang's laboratory. The light scattered into fractals against the neural interface panels that lined the walls, each one humming with the collective memories of humanity, or rather, what remained of them. Kang stood motionless before the central console, his fingers hovering over the activation sequence. The memory erasure protocol, his life's work, was finally complete. Not that anyone outside the council would understand its true purpose. They had commissioned it as a tool for further control, but Kang had designed it for liberation. "Father, when will you be home?" Min-An's voice echoed from the communication panel, pulling him from his thoughts. "Soon, little one," he replied, watching her image flicker on the screen. At 12, she had his determined chin, but her mother's gentle eyes that increasingly looked at the world with programmed indifference rather than wonder. "Have you completed your synchronization today?" "Yes," she answered flatly. "The Council's new memory package was installed during school hours. We learned about the Great Peace disaster and how memory control saved humanity from its violent tendencies." Kang's jaw tightened. "And what did you learn?" "That before synchronized memories, humans fought wars because they remembered grievances. That individualized memory led to chaos, pain, and destruction." She recited this without emotion, without questioning. The collective memory system ended suffering by erasing divisive histories and creating shared experiences. "I see," Kang said, his heart heavy. "And did they mention what else was erased?" A flicker of confusion crossed Min-An's face. "Erased? Nothing was erased. Father, only optimized." Kang closed his eyes briefly. "I'll be home for dinner. We can talk more then." The communication ended, and Kang turned back to his work. The memory erasure protocol before him was not what the Council believed it to be. They had commissioned it as a perfected system to isolate and erase dangerous or disruptive memories from the collective consciousness. What they didn't know was that Kang had built in a back door, a mechanism that would do the opposite. He reached for the small, withered flower he kept in a vial beside his console. It had been a real flower once, not the synthetic varieties that now populated the city's carefully controlled green spaces. His wife, Lin, had given it to him on their last day together, before the mandatory memory synchronization took her individuality, then her will to live. "Soon," he whispered to the flower. In the year 2195, nearly 5 decades after the Great Peace disaster, humanity lived in carefully constructed networks of collective memory. What had begun as a well-intentioned effort to prevent global conflict by harmonizing traumatic memories had evolved into something far more invasive, a system that not only regulated what people remembered, but determined what was worth remembering at all. Beauty, passion, deep love, profound grief. These complex emotional memories had been deemed dangerous stimuli by the Memory Council, and so they had been locked away, supposedly for humanity's protection. But Kang knew better. He had glimpsed what was hidden, and he had found a way to unlock it, though the price would be higher than anyone should have to pay. "Dr. Kang," a voice called from the laboratory entrance. It was Dr. Lan, his colleague, and one of the few people he still trusted. "The Council has requested a status report on the protocol. They're growing impatient." Kang motioned her inside and sealed the door. "Tell them it's proceeding as scheduled. The public announcement will take place next week as planned." Lan approached cautiously, her eyes darting to the screens displaying complex neural pathways and memory codes. "What aren't you telling me, Kang? I've known you too long not to see when you're hiding something." For a moment, Kang considered keeping his plans secret even from her. But he needed an ally, someone who would understand what needed to be done when the time came. "The protocol works," he said carefully, "but not as they expect. Understanding dawned on Lan's face. You've found them, haven't you? The sealed memories. Kang nodded. Not just found. I've created a pathway to release them, but it requires a sacrifice. What kind of sacrifice? He turned back to his console, pulling up a complex sequence of neural images. The memory erasure protocol will work as designed, but in reverse. Instead of removing targeted memories from the collective, it will restore them. But it needs a conduit, a single consciousness to absorb the erasure process while simultaneously releasing the locked memories back into the system. Lan's face paled. A consciousness? You mean a person? Someone would have to be wiped completely for this to work. Not just wiped, Kang corrected grimly. Transformed. Their individual identity would be erased, but their consciousness would become the vessel for the suppressed memories, a living library of what humanity once was. That's suicide, Lan whispered. No, Kang replied. It's evolution, becoming something more than human so that humans can remember what being human truly means. Who would volunteer for such a thing? Kang didn't answer, but the determined set of his jaw told Lan everything she needed to know. Kang, no, you can't. What about Min-Un? She's already lost her mother. At the mention of his daughter, Kang's resolve faltered momentarily. What kind of father would I be if I left her in a world without true memory, without understanding the depth of what it means to be human? The Council has already begun erasing her natural memories and replacing them with their sanitized versions. Last week, she couldn't remember her mother's face without looking at a photograph. He turned to face Lan directly. I'm not abandoning her. I'm fighting for her right to remember, to feel the full spectrum of human experience, even if it means she must lose me in the process. Lan was silent for a long moment, her scientific mind wrestling with the ethical implications. Finally, she asked, What do you need me to do? Kang exhaled with relief. When the time comes, make sure Min-Un understands why I did this, and help her remember everything. As Kang returned home that evening, the automated transport pod gliding silently through the gleaming corridors of Neo Memoria, he felt the weight of his decision. The city stretched around him, a marvel of post-disaster engineering, clean, efficient, and utterly devoid of the messy complexity that had once defined human civilization. Citizens moved with purpose, but without passion. Their synchronized memories created a society without conflict, but also without the spark that had once driven humanity to create art, music, and literature that touched the soul. Their apartment was in the sciences quadrant, a modest but comfortable space with views of the central memory hub, the massive structure that housed the servers containing the collective memory of all citizens. Min-Un was waiting, as always, her homework projection hovering before her. What are you studying? Kang asked, setting down his research materials. Post-disaster societal restructuring, she replied. It's fascinating how quickly humanity adapted to the collective memory system. Kang sat beside her. And what does your textbook say about those who resisted adaptation? Min-Un frowned slightly. It says resistance was based on irrational attachment to painful individual memories. The Council helped those people understand that collective harmony was more important than individual suffering. I see. Kang chose his next words carefully. Min-Un, do you remember your mother? The question seemed to surprise her. Of course. The Council-approved memory package includes her biographical data and my relationship to her. No, I mean, do you remember her? How her voice sounded when she sang to you? How she smelled like jasmine after the rain? How she always tucked your hair behind your ear when you were concentrating too hard? Min-Un's brow furrowed. Those details aren't part of the essential memory package. The Council deems such specific memories as potentially destabilizing to collective harmony. Kang reached into his pocket and withdrew a small device, an illegal memory projector he had modified to bypass the council's protocols. "I want to show you something." Before Min-an could protest, he activated the device. A holographic image appeared between them, a woman with laughing eyes and a wide smile, spinning a young Min-an in circles as autumn leaves fell around them. "This is from your 5th birthday," Kang said softly. Before the council began the childhood memory standardization program, Min-an stared at the image, her expression confused. "This doesn't match my memory file of that day." "Because it's the real memory, not the one they gave you." Kang swiped to another image, the 3 of them on a beach, waves lapping at their feet. "And this was our last vacation together, before your mother's accident." "Accident?" Min-an's voice wavered. "My memory file says she died of neural degradation from natural causes." Kang's expression darkened. The neural degradation wasn't natural. It was a side effect of her resistance to the 3rd phase memory synchronization. She refused to let them take her memories of us, of real love. Her mind couldn't handle the conflict between what she knew was real and what they were forcing her to accept as real. Min-an's hands trembled as she reached toward the hologram. I don't remember any of this. Why don't I remember?" "Because they took it from you," Kang said gently. "From all of us. But I've found a way to bring it back. Not just for you, but for everyone." As Min-an processed this revelation, Kang could see the first flicker of real emotion in her eyes in months, confusion giving way to sadness, then to a quiet anger. It was dangerous, what he was doing. The council monitored all dwellings for signs of memory subversion, but he needed her to understand what was at stake. "There are beautiful things, Min-an," he said. "Beautiful, terrible, wonderful things that make us human. Things worth remembering, even if they hurt sometimes." "Like what?" she asked, her voice small. "Like the way your mother laughed until she cried when I told terrible jokes. Like how it feels to miss someone so much your chest aches with it. Like the stories your grandmother told about her childhood before the disaster. Real stories, not the sanitized versions in your history texts." Min-an looked up at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears, tears that the council's emotional regulation would soon suppress. "Can you help me remember, Father?" Kang pulled her close. "Yes, little one. That's exactly what I'm going to do." In the days that followed, Kang intensified his work on the memory erasure protocol, knowing that the council was watching his every move. Officially, he was perfecting a system to identify and remove harmful memory anomalies from the collective consciousness. Secretly, he was creating a key to unlock humanity's sealed memories. The council had become increasingly suspicious of his late nights and irregular research patterns. Twice, he had been called to explain discrepancies in his reporting. Each time, he had managed to deflect their concerns with technical jargon and false demonstrations of progress on their terms. But time was running out. The announcement of the new protocol was scheduled for the upcoming Memory Restoration Day, the ironic name given to the annual celebration of when the council had first implemented mass memory control. Dr. Lan had become his confidant and accomplice, helping to conceal his true activities while gathering the critical data he needed for his plan to succeed. "I've secured access to the primary neural network as requested," she told him one evening, her voice low despite the signal scramblers Kang had installed in his laboratory. "But Kang, the security protocols are tightening. The council knows something is happening." "Have they identified what?" Kang asked, not looking up from his work. "No, but they're implementing a system-wide scan of all memory research facilities tomorrow. If they find your modifications to the protocol." "They won't," Kang assured her. "I've hidden the true nature of the code within standard memory architecture. To anyone else, it looks like an advanced erasure algorithm. Lan placed a hand on his shoulder. And what about the volunteer aspect? How will you implement that without their knowledge? Kang finally looked up. I've designed it to require manual activation from within the primary interface chamber. The Council believes this is a security measure, that the protocol can only be initiated by authorized personnel physically present at the console. What they don't know is that the person who activates it will become the conduit. And that person will be you, Lan said, not as a question, but as a statement of fact. Yes. Kang pulled up a complex neural map on his display. I've been preparing my own neural pathways for weeks, taking specialized compounds to enhance my brain's capacity to serve as the conduit. When I activate the protocol, my consciousness will be converted into the medium through which the sealed memories will flow back into the collective. And what will happen to you? Lan asked, though she already knew the answer. The individual known as Dr. Kang will cease to exist, he said with remarkable calm. But what I am, my essence, will become part of the memory stream itself. Not gone, but transformed. Lan's scientific mind struggled with the metaphysical implications. You can't know that for certain. This has never been done before. No, Kang agreed. But I've seen enough in my research to believe it's possible. The human consciousness is more adaptable than we've been led to believe. He hesitated, then added, There's something else I need you to do. From a secured compartment in his laboratory, Kang withdrew a collection of memory crystal, small, glowing shards that contained recorded memories outside the Council's system. These are the stories I've been collecting, he explained. Real memories from people on the fringes of society, farmers who still remember cultivating actual soil, nomadic poets who memorize histories the Council has tried to erase, elders who recall what it was like to fall in love before emotional regulation. I need you to preserve these. Make copies. Spread them after the protocol is activated. Lan took the crystals reverently. I will. But Kang, have you prepared Min-An for what's to come? Kang's expression clouded. I've tried. I've been showing her real memories, telling her stories of what the world was like before, but there's only so much I can do without triggering the Council's monitoring systems. She'll need guidance after. I've recorded messages for her, Kang said. They're hidden throughout our apartment, in places only she would look, and I've prepared one final recording for when it happens. He handed Lan a small crystal, different from the others. Make sure she gets this afterward. As the days counted down to the protocol announcement, Kang found himself torn between his work in the laboratory and precious moments with his daughter. Each evening became a careful balance of subtle memory education, showing her illegal images of the past, telling her stories that contradicted the Council's narratives, all while avoiding detection by the monitoring systems. He took her to the edge of the city one evening, to an abandoned farm where a few stubborn plants still grew wild, real plants, not the genetically standardized versions permitted within city limits. Touch it, he encouraged her, pointing to a wildflower pushing up through a crack in the concrete. Feel how different it is from the synthetic ones in the recreation zones. Min-An knelt and gingerly touched the purple petals. It's imperfect, she said, but not disapprovingly. The petals aren't symmetrical. That's what makes it beautiful, Kang replied. Real beauty isn't about perfection. It's about character, uniqueness. As they explored the abandoned farm, they encountered an old man living in what remained of the farmhouse, one of the memory keepers Kang had recorded for his collection. With Kang's encouragement, the man told Min-An stories of farming before the disaster, of watching things grow from tiny seeds into food that nourished both body and soul. The Council says agriculture was inefficient and emotionally unpredictable, Min-An said, repeating her lessons. The old farmer laughed. Of course they'd say that. can't control a crop the way they control memories. Nature has its own ideas. On their way home, Min-un was unusually quiet, processing what she had heard. Finally, she asked, "Father, why are you showing me these things now? Why have you been telling me different stories than the ones in school?" Kang chose his words carefully. "Because soon, things will change, and I want you to be prepared for that change, to understand it when it comes." "What kind of change?" "A remembering," he said simply. "A great remembering." The night before the protocol announcement, Kang recorded his final message for Min-un. He sat before the recording crystal in his home office, trying to find the right words to explain his choice to his daughter. "Min-un," he began, his voice steady despite the emotion behind it. "By the time you see this, the memory erasure protocol will have been activated, but not in the way the Council intended. Instead of erasing more of humanity's past, it will have restored what was taken from us." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I want you to understand why I had to be the one to do this. When your mother died, when she chose to resist the memory synchronization, she made me promise to find a way to preserve what makes us human. Our joy, our pain, our love, our loss. These aren't flaws to be corrected. They're the essence of who we are." Kang wiped away an unexpected tear. The Council believes that by controlling memory, they can prevent another disaster. But in trying to protect humanity from itself, they've stolen its soul. We've become efficient, but empty. Peaceful, but passionless. That's not the world I want for you, my daughter. He leaned closer to the crystal, his voice growing more intense. After the protocol activates, people will begin to remember, truly remember. There will be confusion, maybe even chaos for a time. Some will be afraid of the emotions that come flooding back. Others will be angry at what was taken from them. But eventually, they will understand that remembering is the first step toward healing. Kang took a deep breath. "As for me, I won't be there with you, not in the way you've known me. The activation process requires a conduit, a consciousness to absorb the erasure while releasing the sealed memories. I've volunteered to be that conduit." He smiled sadly. "I'm not dying, Min-un. I'm becoming something else, a part of the memory stream itself. In a way, I'll be more present than ever before, in the memories that return to everyone." His expression grew serious again. "Remember what I've taught you. Remember that the purpose of memory isn't just to avoid repeating mistakes. It's to cherish what we've learned, who we've loved, what we've overcome. Remember to remember, my little one." With that, Kang ended the recording and secured it in a place where only Min-un would find it, inside the battered copy of pre-disaster poetry that had belonged to her mother. On the morning of the protocol announcement, Neo Memoria hummed with anticipation. The Memory Council had promoted the event as a breakthrough in collective harmony, the final solution to the problem of disruptive individualized memories. Citizens gathered in public squares and homes to watch the broadcast from the central memory hub. The announcement would be followed by an immediate system-wide implementation, synchronized across all neural interfaces. Kang arrived at the central hub early, passing through multiple security checkpoints with the credentials of a lead researcher. Dr. Lan met him in the preparation chamber, her face tense with suppressed emotion. "Everything is ready," she confirmed quietly. "The Council's technicians have completed the final diagnostics. They've found nothing unusual in the protocol's architecture." Kang nodded. "And the memory crystals?" "Distributed to trusted contacts throughout the city. Once the protocol activates, they'll begin spreading the stories." A moment of silence passed between them, the silence of colleagues who had become conspirators, of friends who were about to say goodbye. "Kang," Lan said finally, "are you absolutely certain this is the only way?" He looked at her steadily. "To break the Council's control over collective memory?" "Yes. The system is too entrenched, too pervasive for gradual change. It needs a shock, a massive influx of suppressed memories, too powerful to contain. But the cost is one I'm willing to pay. Kang clasped her shoulder briefly. Take care of Min An for me. Help her understand. Before Lan could respond, the chamber door opened and members of the Memory Council entered, their expressions solemn but satisfied. Dr. Kang, the head counselor, greeted him. Today marks the culmination of your life's work. The memory erasure protocol will ensure that humanity never again strays toward the chaos of individualized emotional memory. Kang bowed his head in feigned agreement. Indeed, Counselor, the protocol is ready for implementation. Excellent. The announcement will begin in 15 minutes. You will demonstrate the protocol's activation for the public broadcast, though, of course, the actual memory adjustments will be phased in gradually over the coming weeks. Of course, Kang replied, knowing that nothing would happen as the council expected. As the counselors moved away to prepare for the broadcast, Lan leaned close to Kang. They don't suspect anything. They can't imagine anyone would choose to sacrifice themselves for memory. Kang replied, That's their fundamental blindness. They've forgotten that some things are worth dying for. The Central Memory Hub's broadcast chamber was a vast circular room dominated by the neural interface core, a towering column of light and energy that connected to every citizen's memory implant. Around its base was the control console, where Kang would activate the protocol. As cameras positioned themselves and the council took their places on the elevated platform, Kang stood before the console, running through the activation sequence in his mind one last time. The head counselor stepped forward to address the cameras. Citizens of Neo Memoria, today we take the final step toward perfect collective harmony. For decades, we have worked to free humanity from the burden of disruptive memories, the painful emotions, the divisive histories, the chaotic individualism that led to the Great Peace disaster. Kang half listened to the speech, his focus on the console before him. Through the neural interface in his temple, he could feel the vast network of connected minds throughout the city, millions of consciousnesses linked together in a carefully controlled system. Dr. Kang's memory erasure protocol represents the pinnacle of our memory science. The counselor continued. With its implementation, the last vestiges of pre-disaster memory patterns will be identified and harmonized, creating a truly unified collective consciousness. At the appropriate moment, Kang stepped forward. The cameras turned to him as he placed his hands on the activation console. The protocol works by identifying memory anomalies that create emotional distress or social disharmony, he explained for the broadcast. These anomalies are then isolated and replaced with standardized memory patterns that promote collective well-being. What he didn't say was that he had reversed the targeting algorithm. Instead of identifying and erasing emotional memories, it would identify and release them, all of them, from the locked archives where the council had stored the full emotional spectrum of human experience. I will now demonstrate the activation sequence, Kang announced. His fingers moved across the console, entering the complex code that would trigger the protocol. As he worked, he felt a moment of doubt, not about the rightness of his choice, but about leaving Min An behind. Would she understand? Would she forgive him? It was too late for such questions now. The final sequence was complete. All that remained was to place his palm on the neural interface pad, the action that would designate him as the conduit. Kang looked up one last time, his eyes finding Lan's in the crowd. She gave him an almost imperceptible nod. For humanity, he whispered, and pressed his palm to the interface. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. Pain shot through Kang's body as the protocol began extracting his consciousness from his physical form. Through the neural connection, he could feel his mind expanding outward, stretching impossibly thin as it began to merge with the memory network. Around him, alarms began to sound as the council's technicians realized something was wrong. The neural interface core flared with unexpected energy, pulsing with colors never before seen in the sterile chamber. "What's happening?" the head counselor demanded. "Shut it down!" But it was too late. Kang's consciousness was already becoming the conduit, and through that conduit, the sealed memories began to flow, not away into oblivion as the council had planned, but outward, back into the collective consciousness of Neo Memoria's citizens. As his physical body collapsed before the console, Kang's awareness expanded exponentially. He was everywhere at once, in the neural implant of every citizen, in the central servers of the memory hub, in the very infrastructure of the city itself. And with him came the memories. Throughout Neo Memoria, people stopped what they were doing as forgotten emotions and experiences flooded their consciousness. They remembered love, not the approved, regulated affection permitted by the council, but passionate, messy, overwhelming love. They remembered grief in all its raw power. They remembered beauty, not as an abstract concept, but as something that could move one to tears. Parents suddenly recalled the profound joy of their children's births. Elderly citizens remembered childhoods filled with unregulated play and imagination. Artists remembered the creative fire that had once driven human expression. And they remembered the history that had been taken from them, the true story of the Great Peace disaster. Not as a failure of individualism, but as a power grab by those who sought to control humanity through memory itself. In the central hub, chaos erupted as the council desperately tried to contain what was happening, but their efforts were futile. The protocol had been designed to be irreversible once activated, and Kang's consciousness, now diffused throughout the system, prevented any override. Dr. Lan moved quickly through the confusion, reaching Kang's collapsed form. His body still breathed, but his eyes stared sightlessly ahead. His consciousness no longer contained within his physical form. "Get a medical team," she shouted, maintaining the pretense that this was a medical emergency rather than a planned transformation. As technicians and council guards rushed about in confusion, Lan leaned close to Kang's ear. "It's working," she whispered. "They're remembering." Throughout the city, the initial shock was giving way to a complex wave of emotions. Some people wept openly in the streets as long-suppressed feelings overwhelmed them. Others stood in stunned silence, processing the return of memories they hadn't known were missing. Still others began to gather, instinctively seeking community as they navigated this new emotional landscape. In the sciences quadrant, Minun sat before the broadcast screen, watching in horror as her father collapsed. But even as fear gripped her, something else was happening in her mind. Memories were returning. Memories of her mother singing lullabies, of running through real grass, of feelings too complex for the council's approved emotional spectrum. "Father," she whispered, somehow understanding that he was behind what was happening. As the hours passed, Neo Memoria transformed. The council's control systems began to fail as citizens rejected the memory synchronization that had been imposed on them for decades. Memory centers, once places of mandatory harmonization, were abandoned or repurposed as gathering spots for people sharing their newly recovered memories. Dr. Lan, having escaped the central hub during the confusion, made her way to Kang's apartment, where she found Min An curled on the floor, overwhelmed by the rush of restored memories. "It's all right," Lan soothed, helping the girl to sit up. "What you're feeling, it's natural. It's human." "What happened to my father?" Min An asked, her voice shaking with emotion that would have been suppressed only hours before. Lan sat beside her. "He gave himself to free our memories. He became the conduit for all the emotions and experiences the council had locked away." "Is he dead?" "Not exactly." Lan struggled to explain the complex transformation. "His physical body can no longer sustain consciousness, but his mind, his essence, it's become part of the memory stream itself. In a way, he's everywhere now. Min-an was quiet for a moment, processing this. Then she asked, "Did he leave anything for me?" "He said you would find messages throughout your home, in places only you would know to look." With sudden determination, Min-an went to her mother's bookshelf and pulled out an old volume of poetry. Inside, she found the memory crystal her father had recorded. As Kang's final message played, tears streamed down Min-an's face, tears of grief, but also of understanding. When the message ended, she held the crystal tightly. "He wants us to remember," she said softly. "Not just what we've lost, but what we've been." In the days that followed, Neo Memoria underwent a profound transformation. The Memory Council's authority crumbled as citizens rejected their control. Some council members fled the city, fearing retribution for decades of memory manipulation. Others stayed, claiming they had only been trying to protect humanity from its own destructive tendencies. Without the enforced harmony of synchronized memories, conflicts did emerge. People argued over interpretations of the past, over how society should reorganize, over the very nature of memory itself. But these conflicts, though sometimes heated, were the natural discourse of a free society rediscovering itself. Dr. Lan became a central figure in the transition, using her scientific knowledge to help people understand what had happened and how to integrate their restored memories. The memory crystals Kang had collected became precious resources, containing authentic experiences that had been preserved outside the Council's system. 3 months after what people had begun calling the Remembering, Min-an stood before a growing crowd in what had once been the central memory hub. The towering neural interface core had been repurposed, transformed into the centerpiece of what was now called the Museum of Memory. "My father believed that remembering is what makes us human," she told the gathered citizens. "Not just remembering facts or events, but remembering how to feel, how to connect, how to love and grieve and hope." Around her, the walls of the former hub displayed images and stories collected from throughout the city. Real memories freely shared rather than imposed. Some were joyful, others painful, but all were authentic human experiences. The Council thought they were protecting us by controlling our memories. Min-an continued. "They believed that by erasing our pain, they could prevent another disaster. But they were wrong. It's not pain we need to avoid, it's forgetting what caused it." She gestured to the displays around them. "This museum will stand as a reminder of both what we lost and what we've regained. It will grow as we share our memories, building a collective understanding that comes from choice rather than control." As she spoke, Min-an felt a familiar presence, not physically, but in the way certain thoughts seemed to form in her mind. Since the Remembering, many people had reported similar experiences, moments of insight or clarity that seemed to come from outside themselves, as if the collective consciousness had gained a guide. Scientists like Lan theorized that Kang's consciousness, diffused throughout the neural network, had indeed survived in some form, not as an individual, but as a kind of memory shepherd, helping people navigate their restored emotional landscapes. "My father used to say that memory isn't just about the past," Min-an told the crowd. "It's about building a future worth remembering." As she finished speaking, a strange phenomenon occurred, one that had been happening sporadically throughout the city since the Remembering. The lights in the museum dimmed momentarily, and in that darkness, many reported seeing a fleeting image in their mind's eye, a man standing before a console, his expression peaceful as he pressed his palm to a glowing interface. The vision lasted only seconds, but it left a profound sense of peace in its wake. Some called these occurrences Kang's echo, momentary connections to the consciousness that had sacrificed itself to restore humanity's memory. Later that evening, Min-an sat alone in what had been her father's study, surrounded by his research notes and personal belongings. She had been gradually working through them, trying to understand the full scope of what he had accomplished. "I miss you," she said aloud, a habit she had developed in the months since the remembering. "But I'm beginning to understand why you did it." A soft chime from her father's old communication panel startled her. Such systems had been largely abandoned since the Council's fall, replaced by more direct forms of communication. Curious, Min-an activated the panel. No image appeared, only a text message, simple but impossible. "Remember to remember." Whether it was a glitch in the system, a pre-programmed message, or something more mysterious, Min-an couldn't know. But she smiled through her tears, feeling a connection to her father that transcended physical presence. Outside her window, Neo Memoria glowed in the evening light, a city relearning what it meant to be fully human, with all the joy and pain that entailed. Citizens gathered in community spaces, sharing stories and creating new memories together. Artists, their creativity no longer suppressed, filled public areas with expressions of humanity's complex emotional spectrum. And throughout it all, flowing like an invisible current, was the consciousness of the man who had sacrificed himself so that others could remember what humanity once was, and could be again. In what had once been the Council's private archives, now open to all citizens, a small memorial had been established. It consisted of a simple console similar to the one where Kang had activated the protocol, and beside it, a vial containing a withered but preserved flower, the same one he had kept in his laboratory. A plaque beneath it bore the words that had become something of a mantra in the reborn city. To remember is to live. To forget is to merely exist. Dr. Kang gave himself so that we might remember how to live again. Visitors to the memorial often reported a sense of profound connection to their own memories, to each other, and to something larger than themselves. Scientists could explain this as the natural effect of a population rediscovering its emotional capacity. Others believed it was something more, the lingering presence of a consciousness that had become one with memory itself. Min-an visited the memorial regularly, sometimes bringing new memories to share, stories her father had told her, moments they had shared, lessons he had taught. She would speak these aloud, adding them to the growing collective of authentic human experience that was rebuilding society from within. 1 year after the remembering, Min-an stood at the edge of what had once been the abandoned farm where her father had shown her real wildflowers. It had been transformed into a thriving community garden where citizens grew actual plants, imperfect, unpredictable, and beautiful in their authenticity. As she knelt to touch a purple flower similar to the one her father had shown her, she felt that familiar presence, a thought that seemed to come from elsewhere. The beauty is in the imperfection. Min-an smiled. Whether it was her father's consciousness reaching out from within the memory stream, or simply her own mind remembering his wisdom, didn't matter. What mattered was that she remembered, and in remembering, kept alive not just the man who had been her father, but the human spirit he had fought to preserve. Throughout Neo Memoria, now simply called Memoria by its citizens, people were learning to balance individual memory with collective understanding, not through forced synchronization, but through shared stories, through art and music and literature that expressed the full spectrum of human experience. It wasn't always harmonious. There were conflicts and disagreements, moments of pain and confusion as people navigated a world where emotions were no longer regulated. But even in these challenges, there was a vitality that had been absent under the Council's regime, the messy, complicated, beautiful reality of being fully human. And somewhere within the neural networks that still connected the city within the consciousness of every citizen who had regained their memories, within the very fabric of a society rebuilding itself on authenticity rather than control. Dr. Kang existed, not as he once had, but as something more diffuse and perhaps more profound. Not just a memory, but memory itself, not just remembered, but remembering, not just loved, but love itself. The man who had volunteered for the memory wipe so that others could remember what humanity once was.